Welcome to the May State of the Union. We actually have good news in caging results. I know, who would have thought it? But April mail revenue was up year over year. Total gifts, slight decline, but up 9% in terms of total revenue. Those of you doing the math, we'll have a slide later on, but that means an average gift increase of about 10%, which is great to see. The usual the caveats that I give when we were going down are the same ones that I'll give now that we're going, or at least have gone up for April. Any sort of results that we're looking at here are month over month, so there could be timing differences involved in these. There are certainly attribution challenges in this. We're working on some thought leadership about how increasingly mail donations are influenced by mail and happening online where things are transacted. And would also say that this could represent changes in volume mailed rather than just results. I know that we're working on a report based on last year that, knock on wood, you will be able to see before we get together for our next State of the Union. We'll see if we can make that timeline, but what we're seeing there is that results per piece per person didn't necessarily go down last year, but mail volumes quantities did, and so that is something I want to highlight. All that said, up is better than. Happy about seeing that changeover for once. And it was wide. It was a wide change across sectors. One of the two sectors that went down was higher education, and that's a smaller amount, I would say, kind of a rounding error among a bunch of these. The one to note, I would say, is faith communities. A large part of that is increased support of Jewish organizations, largely, we suppose, due to the ongoing war in the Middle East. We'll say that giving to health disease organizations does continue to go down, which is a worrisome area and one that we're looking at, but everything else on the way up for April over April. Here's that average gift increase that we talked about. Now, year to date, not as rosy. You've seen the monthlies for the past 3 months, down over last year. And you can see that this is the only month that has been up, and it's consistent with previous months. Looking at this, you can see that April of last year was kind of particularly bad, and so there is sort of a lowered bar effect on this, but April is up over last year, and it's up over the previous 2 months, which is always good to see. So looking at year-to-date revenue by sector, every sector is down except for that faith community sector that we talked a little bit about. Any questions or comments on any of this? Oh, sorry. I do see I wrote the notes incorrectly. It says every sector is down year over year, but you'll note that sports and recreation does have an increase year over year. So that smaller amount, possibly an anomaly, but up is up is up. Okay. I mentioned I'd be taking the test of the month club that I started. Gosh, I started back when I was at MAD, so this is many moons ago. That we were doing with the TNPA and moving it into this presentation. So test of the month for May, in honor of May the 4th, we're doing Metaphors Be With You. And it's instead of 1 test, it's 3. And it's all about how the metaphors that we choose change the way that our constituents think about us and our issues. And so these specific examples may not work for your organization, but hopefully the general point of we need to look at how we talk about things is going to be an important one. So the war on cancer, what is it good for? Researchers went in and said, okay, we're going to look at 2 different framings of cancer. Cancer is a hostile growth and an invasive spread of the abnormal cells. and asked people what are things you would do to fight against developing cancer, and that's the enemy frame. And then there's this neutral frame is it's an imbalanced growth, it's an unbalanced spread of cells. What would you do to reduce your risk of developing cancer? So similar sort of phrasings, but one is definitely more of a get your dukes up cancer. I'm going to punch cancer right in the face type framing. And so then people afterwards were asked to list behaviors. What would you do to avoid cancer? What would you do? What would you not do so that you can avoid cancer? So the war on cancer, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And it's actually counterproductive. The enemy metaphor, when it was used in this, caused people to list out fewer things that they would limit themselves from doing to avoid getting cancer. And there was no statistically significant change in self-bolstering behaviors. So war on cancer wasn't an effective framing for this in terms of getting people to change their behavior. So that said, the war metaphor can, in some cases, be good. Looking at climate change, people were looked at an article about climate change, and there were three different treatments. We are in a war against climate change. We're in a race against climate change, and we're going to talk about the issue of climate change. And so, how did people change their risk perception, and how did they change their behavior? There was also a subpart of this study that talked about the recency effect of where you set the timelines for cancer. If that's, I'm sorry, for climate change, if that's of interest to you, I'd go for the whole study. Doesn't really change much for this particular test. So in this case, the war against climate change actually led to more action. People who saw things as urgent were more likely to believe in global warming. Those who were more likely to believe were more likely to act. And those who saw the war metaphor were more likely to act. And so saying we're in a war against climate change was effective. A war against cancer was not. How do you reconcile those? I don't know. But it does go to the point of in each issue area, we want to make sure that the framings that we're using are things that are not only effective for fundraising, but also for getting people to take action on the issues that we care about. And then there's a slightly more famous study of looking at how crime is portrayed. You can look at crime as a virus infecting the city or a beast preying on the city. And then they ask people, in your opinion, what does this community need to do to reduce crime? So people were writing out ideas, and people said, researchers looked at those and said, these are enforcement solutions, these are reform solutions. And not surprising, we said we're going to punish the beast and we're going to reform the virus, treat the virus. And so over 70% of the solutions when you said it's a beast preying on the city were enforcement related, whereas under 60% when you said it's a virus infecting the city, because virus is something treatable. And so this gap in just those words that people got was larger than the gap between Democrats and Republicans on the same study. And so how much does framing matter? More than all of the internecine conflicts that we're seeing between red and blue nowadays. And that's actually a fairly consistent study finding, that wording that you can use. I remember one that we've covered in a previous Test of the Month Club was talking about imagine and imagining the plight of, in this case, it was Syrian refugees. And if you use that imagine language, the impact that it had was more than the impact of partisanship. That is, Republicans were more likely to support pro acceptance of Syrian refugees when they got the Imagine language than Democrats who did not get the Imagine language. So powerful stuff are metaphors. So the words that we're choosing matter. We can choose them for good or ill. And a bad metaphor is a cucumber with a parachute. Any questions on the test of the month or metaphors? In which case I'm going to throw in a joke that I saw while writing this about metaphors. that didn't make it to the slides. Why don't kleptomaniacs understand metaphors? Because they take everything literally. But uh, the Lilly School just came out with a new report about giving to LGBTQ organizations. Do we have any on the call today? In that case, I'm going to really go through this rather quickly, but the idea of subsectors here, I think will be interesting to even those who are not with these organizations. So inflation-adjusted giving to the LGBTQ sector has increased significantly, more than doubled over a decade, but it's still a very small share of Wow, lost you there for a second. My apologies. Can let me know if you can't see my screen, changes in priorities and subsectors. Okay, so this was an interesting part to me, that the priorities within this frankly small sector of giving, the subsectors changed significantly. Civil rights giving went down from 58% of total giving to 53%. Youth giving for LGBTQ issues went up from 15% to 22%. And HIV/AIDS giving was flat in inflation adjusted terms. When you're more than doubling your overall support, that meant that that percentage of giving went from 29% down to 15%. And so interesting to see that these subsectors are so important. And it does make me think about many of these many organizations could have LGBTQ issues as a subsector. Were they willing to, you can look at this and say, I'm a human services organization. LGBTQ has me as a subsector. We're going to flip that around and make LGBTQ issues a subsector of what we do in terms of human services, depending, of course, on the nature of your organization. Any questions there before we go into the potpourri section? Okay, there have been some changes in how USPS is treating nonprofit mail. This is a victory that the Alliance for Nonprofit Mailers was involved in last year, back in what was it, July. In the postal bulletin, the Postal Service said that you can't go more than 2 inches thick and still use a nonprofit rate. So within marketing mail, there's marketing mail marketing parcels, which are 12 inches long, 9 inches high, and only 2 inches thick. Those are available to nonprofit and commercial, and the nonprofit rates are a discount. Then there's the other category, which is nonprofit, which is marketing mail, nonprofit machinable parcels, which are subproducts that can be up to 108 inches in combined length and girth. So the Postal Service put into the bulletin, hey, the nonprofit rate, even category 2, only can have 2 inches in girth. And so with work from the Alliance for Nonprofit Mailers, you can now go back to that 108 inches standard with marketing mail, looking at those machinable parcels. So don't know if anyone was mailing mugs. I thought I had put about everything that you can put into an envelope at one point or another in my career. I've done checks, I've done teddy bears, I've done petitions with actual pens. And back in the day, we tried to use flat pens, which work about as well as you think they do. Teddy bears, all of that, but I have not mailed a mug. So if you want to, more power to you, and we can help. Amy says that we are mailing mugs, and this is useful. Thank you. Glad to hear that it's helpful for you, and glad to hear that people are mailing mugs, because I would I'm guessing that's effective for probably a higher value donor, and hopefully helpful in attracting their support and keeping their support. State of the month gosh, State of the Union, a number of months ago, we covered the Pope's puffer jacket that didn't really exist, but was an AI creation. And so wanted, and also if you want our take on it, our LinkedIn newsletter, The Ethics of the Pope Strip, which was one of my favorite titles ever, is available online. All of which to say, on the Pope AI beat, Pope Francis is attending the G7 summit in June, where he's going to be participating in a working session on the ethical implications of AI, looking at how do we make AI remain human-centered and human-controlled. So interesting there. The UK has essentially banned the use of password as a password or admin or those sorts of things. Manufacturers sometimes put in those backdoors for login credentials that you're supposed to change, and not everyone does. So the UK's Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act says that every device has to ship with either a randomized password or generate a password as you log in. So you can't have incremental passwords like password 1, password 2, etc. Nor can it be related to things like Mac ID or SSIDs or those sorts of things. Were you to try to do this, you could get a fine up to about $12 million or 4% of your worldwide revenue, which is higher, which it's going to be higher for a lot of computer manufacturers. So no for individuals using birthdays as passwords. I just wouldn't recommend it. As hopefully we all know by now. Any questions or comments or things that you're hearing from the sector that folks that are share worthy that we'd love to share with the group?